So it was a really, really old sofa. The threads were coming out of the cushion. When you sat down on it, you could feel the wood underneath. It had definitely seen better days. And it smelled like really bad. It smelled of beer. Way too much beer. But it actually didn't matter. All of us sat in the sofa, crammed in the lounge, glued to the TV. It was Thursday, November 9th, 1989. And I won't forget the scene. Who's got it? No one? No one? Someone's got it? The fall of the Berlin Wall. You might have remembered it, but not on the date. I remember sitting there and just being totally captivated with my college floor mates. Suddenly, the wall was coming down. People were crossing over the border. They were cheering. They were ecstatic. The Soviet Union was collapsing. Eastern Europe would no longer be ruled by the chokehold of communist authoritarian rule. Of course, ironically, sadly, tragically, Russia today is probably ruled by a worse leader, but we'll put that aside. At that moment, we could feel history changing in real time and watching it, and I'll never forget it. Over the last 2 weeks, especially last Saturday night and Sunday, we watched as the Assad regime fell and its brutality came to an end. The horrific Sednaya prison, where 30,000 detainees were killed by torture, ill treatment, and mass executions, was opened up. The prisoners released. It's the end of decades of tyrannical, authoritarian family, a ruling family that even used chemical weapons against its own people. And they followed and facilitated in the transfer of weapons to Hezbollah terrorists for years in Lebanon from Iran so they could be used to attack Israel. And then in just 10 days, the country's government simply evaporated. The soldiers gave up en masse, and suddenly a 13-year-old civil war turned into a very easy victory for the rebel groups as the soldiers left their posts. Something that had been an intractable situation for all those years with Russia and Iran supporting the Assad regime disappeared. It was surreal to watch it in real time. Soldiers running from their posts, leaving their uniforms and guns behind. I watched one video of people arriving by plane, running through the airport. No one there at customs. No one guarding. No lines. It was really wild, kind of amazing, but scary. Like many Jews, the first question I had to ask was, is it good for the Jews? And of course, then my second question, is it good for everyone? Who will rule? Has this rebel group reformed, or does it maintain its roots as a group that is, in its ideology at its core, connected to Al-Qaeda? Are they going to rule responsibly? Will they really be in control? Will they be able to prevent their own soldiers from committing atrocities, from turning against Israel? Can they control all the other rebel groups in the mishmash that is Syria? Who knows? Israel couldn't take any chances, and destroyed almost all of Syria's military over the last week. Missiles, chemical weapons, manufacturing plants, its air force, its navy. Israel made sure that whatever happens, it is less likely to be threatened on a large scale. If you think about it, we're living in a unique and uncertain time in history and in Jewish history, and that was even before the events of the last 2 weeks. We have Israel experiencing its worst year in its history, and its hostages still being held for 435 days. It's a little bit unreal. Ukraine has been at war now for almost 3 years, since it was unjustly attacked by a tyrant. The rule of law is threatened on our own soil, and there are threats of all kinds on the horizon. But nonetheless, we can see this change in Syria as a loss for Iran, as a loss for Russia. Israel's actions have largely defanged the Hezbollah, and now there is a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. And maybe most positive is that there's now, I would say, serious talk about freeing the hostages in exchange for a ceasefire in Gaza. There is hope. And we stand amidst both places, the fear and uncertainty on the one side and hope on the other. We stand in this kind of no man's land, in a kind of liminal space. I was thinking about this Parashat that Naomi wonderfully introduced, Parashat Vayishlah. And I thought about it as all about standing in between, in this liminal space where you have one foot in one room and the other foot in the other room, kind of on the threshold of a doorway. You're not fully in either space. The reading opens with this most famous and powerful scene, with Yaakov wrestling with the mysterious assailant. But before that, he's at the Yabok River, which is in modern-day Jordan. And rivers are places of crossing, dangerous places, especially in the ancient world where you didn't have bridges. He's standing at this Yabok River where he has this encounter. And according to some, the word Yabok means a pouring out, a wrestling, a stream that winds through a wild, deep ravine. And on the river's bank, Jacob takes no chances. He divides his camp into two groups. And of course, then the wrestling. Wrestling, one of the most intense, dramatic moments of the Torah. He wrestles all night with this mysterious assailant, and he can't defeat him. But of course, he's not defeated either. They're at a standstill. It's the same feeling. Neither one gets the upper hand. But there's a little bit of another piece that I want to talk about, or two pieces. The first one is the name. Jacob gets a new name, Israel, which becomes the name of the Jewish people. He now has another identity. And so you have to ask, which is he? Is he the Jacob, his original name, which means heel, Ekev, grabbing his brother's heel as he's born, behaving like a heel? Or is he now Israel, the father of the Jewish people? According to some definitions, or maybe more of a midrashic definition and not an actual etymological one, Yisrael Yashar El, he is able to walk with God on this straight path, this moral path. Which is he? Maybe like most of us, he's a little bit of both. He inhabits both spaces simultaneously. The name Yisrael, Israel, is described in the parasha as the one who struggles with, who wrestles with God, who lives in that gray area. And then with his new name and his wrestling-induced limp, he then approaches his brother from whom he has been estranged for decades and at last wanted to kill him. He's afraid what might happen, and again he divides his family into two groups. He's unsure until the very last moment of what's going to happen, until Esau finally runs out to greet him, falling on Jacob's neck, kissing him, and the two of them weep together. And there's one other part of the Parsha that I want to open up. This is a little bit less well known. After Jacob is now settled back in the land of Israel, God appears. And what does God do? God says, he appears to Jacob on his arrival from Padan Aram. God blesses him and then says, Vayomer lo Elohim, Shimcha Yaakov, lo yikareh Shimcha od Yaakov, ki im Yisrael, vayikrat shmo Yisrael. God blesses him, saying, your name is Jacob. You shall now be called Jacob. No, you shall be called Jacob no more, but Israel shall be your name. And thus he was named Israel. And of course you're thinking, wait a second. His name was already changed at the beginning of the Parsha. Why would we have this scene again? You're going to get your name changed. Once seems sufficient. Why does his name get changed again? Maybe it didn't stick. Maybe he's now in the land of Israel and that's where you want to get your name changed. Or now God's doing it instead of this mysterious assailant. Or maybe he's still in both identities. He's still called Jacob on some level. He doesn't leave that part of him behind. He's someone who inhabits those two worlds. His name is changed, and his name on some level means change, and he is changing. Now he's more fully transformed. God now gives him this name, this time without a struggle, without wrestling. And now he's in the land of Israel. Name and place and time all come together. A kind of movement from an impermanence to a more permanent state of mind. But of course we know that it's not going to be one that lasts very long. It's fleeting. Next week we will read about how Jacob's son Joseph goes right into the land of Egypt, followed by his brothers. He will end up a slave. They will end up in Egypt for generations as slaves. It comes together, and then it's gone. I think this is what it means to be a Jew, what it means to be a human being. We're always living in different spaces, in different emotions, in different realities simultaneously. We can be at a simcha, overjoyed, but we also understand there's fragility. We can feel hopeful, but we can also be aware there is fear. We always inhabit both of those moments simultaneously. That is reality, and the tradition reminds us of that over and over again. Life is filled with that duality, certainty and uncertainty, happiness and sadness. They're all around us. But the text teaches us that this isn't new. Don't be surprised by it. It was true 3,700 years ago, and it's true today. We live in a world where things can be great or terrible, where we can win the lottery one day, end up, God forbid, in the hospital the next day. But once we acknowledge that reality and see that we are actually always in between, we are always in those liminal spaces, and we can figure out a little bit better how to live in them. Jacob perseveres on his journey. At the end of his life, at the very end, he's in Egypt, he's blessing his children and his grandchildren, and he acknowledges something really interesting. He says, Hamalach hagoel oti, that there is an angel that has been redeeming me, that there has been this positive force the whole time that I've sensed all along my journey. I like to think of this as a sense of hope, amidst all the travails, all the ups and downs, all the challenges that he experiences and that we too can experience, there is always the potential for sparks of light amidst the darkness. In fact, amidst darkness is where we can best see those glimmers of light. May we find ways not only to cope with the uncertainties of our own time and this liminal space we inhabit, but also find hope in them and even thrive. Shabbat Shalom.